Welcome to the kingdom. I'm Chris, and this is Good Enough Gaming. Howdy folks, and welcome to this painting video where I'm going to be painting two miniatures from Rumbleslam. They're knockoffs, of course, because they don't have the license to print the actual guys, but one of them is not Goku from Dragon Ball Z, and the other one is not Billy or Jimmy Lee from Double Dragon. So I'm going to be painting both of them, but the tutorial here, the painting video, is only going to cover Goku. I use the exact same colors, the exact same techniques, but you'll see as I go through, I'm just going to show you how I painted Goku, and then you'll see Billy, we'll just go with Billy there, as I add the colors to him as well. So as I've done with lots of other videos, I'm going to start with the skin because it's a dominant color, like about half the model is going to be painted in skin, and I'm going to use that same tried and true method, starting with the base coat and then highlighting up with the muscles with two different shades of flesh afterwards. Okay, after getting a second coat down, because when painting that flesh color over black, you definitely need two coats. It's a good paint, but it's not that good. Now we're going to add the first highlight, and I use the same colors as previously. This really is my go-to for all fair-skinned skin tones. Now for darker skin tones, for maybe African or Asian skin tones, I use a different method, but anything that is lighter skinned, I use the same three colors. Bugman's Glow, Cadian Flesh Tone, and then Kislev Flesh as the highlight. I find it's really good to practice on a really muscular figure because the muscles are so defined, it's nice and easy to see where you should put these highlights. If I had to paint these on a less muscular figure and try and figure out on my own where the shades and highlights would go, this would be a much more difficult process. So when you're learning how to highlight these areas, get a figure that has very, very accentuated, defined ridges, edges, and stuff, because then the model helps you know where to add the different layers of paint. Okay, so this is after two coats of that lighter skin tone. You can see I put it on both models, and it may look bad up close. You might think you're not painting the recesses and it makes it look, too much contrast, but seriously, once you put it down on the table, it looks just fine. So with that second layer done, we're now ready to move on just the highlights using Kislev Flesh. And here you're only going to want to hit the top parts of muscles, the edges of muscles, maybe like where his collarbone is, to have it really, really stick out. Don't paint over the entire muscle, just the area that will be the most raised and the most defined. There we have it. The skin for both of them is done. In the case of Goku, that's half the job, and in the case of Billy over there, that's almost the entire model is finished. So that's why I did the skin first. It kind of gives me that real boost of, wow, I've actually accomplished quite a bit. These models are well on their way. Whereas if I'd started with something like his hair or his boots, it wouldn't have felt like I'd done very much. So you approach it however you want. This is just the way I prefer to do it. So now let's go to the other half of Goku and paint his clothing. Now, orange is kind of a difficult paint to work with. So just like with the flesh, I used Jakiro orange. You got to do 2 and sometimes 3 coats just to make sure you get good coverage. But it's always better to do multiple thin coats than gob it on and risk clogging up detail or anything like that. careful when you're painting the top part here or any part of a model where they're very small, thin lines and where a slight slip could end up painting over the skin. Make sure your hand is well braced, your elbow is well anchored. Use a good sharp brush, make sure the paint is flowing and it's very wet, and take your time. Now, once the cloth is dry, at least the first couple coats, now we're going to work on shading. So I was kind of torn whether I wanted a dark shade for the cloth or a light one. I figured I'd start with light because if I didn't like it, I could always add it darker, but if I started dark and didn't like it, I could get lighter. Now you'll see over there on Billy, I already painted his coat. This was when I was still planning on doing 2 models at the same time for this video, but since I'm going to use that same blue on Goku here, I figure I'll talk about the colors and the ways that I used it when I get to him, and then you can just apply that over to Billy. These guys are meant to be a tag team in Rumbleslam, and so I wanted their color schemes to be identical. So getting back over to Goku there, for the folds and creases in the cloth, I used Seraphim Sepia. So you could use any kind of honey or tan colored wash. You could use Agrax Earthshade or a dark brown. It might be a little bit too much of a contrast. So what I did here was just gradually build up the wash in the darkest, deepest folds of his pants there, and I let that kind of build up the color rather than start with something super dark and run the risk of overpowering it. But again, it's up to you. If you like a darker, sharper contrast, you go for it. So here he is with the shades painted in, and I think that's just subtle enough. I didn't want to go much more than that, and it's still noticeable, so I was happy with it, and we're going to move on. So the next thing is to highlight. Now, I'm still looking for some decent oranges. The ones I have all kind of blend together. But here, it's going to be a mix of an edge highlight almost with an entire new shade of the cloth. So I'm not just going to get the sharp edges of the pants, but when I started painting this orange on, I thought I really like the color of it. It's a lot brighter than that Jokera orange, so I ended up just going over it and doing an entire layer over the entirety of the cloth rather than just an edge highlight. Okay, so with the skin and the cloth done, he's about 80% finished. There's really only 2 major base colors that we need to put down here, and the first one is blue. So I decided to use a nice dark navy blue. It's the same one I painted on Billy's coat over there. And here I'm going to put it on his sash, his armbands, and his boots. Now, when I get to the boot laces, there's going to be a little bit of a controversy here. I'll have to let you guys weigh in on it. But for now, a nice coat, nice and slowly applied. Make sure the paint is nice and runny, but not watery. So now that we've got the base color down of that dark navy blue, it's now time to highlight. We're going to start with Lilac blue, and we're going to use the same approach and techniques as we used with doing the skin. That is just highlighting raised areas. Don't paint over the whole thing because we want the darker blue to be our natural shadow. So on the the strands here, the tassels, the part of the sash here out front, let the fabric guide you just like the muscles. If there's a recessed area, leave it alone. When you get to the front here, I'm only going to highlight the very front of the sash. The sides, I'm going to leave them because the way his arms are hanging down, that would be casting a shadow there. Same thing with the armbands. I'm only going to highlight the parts where the muscle of his arm is kind of pushing out on the armband there. So most of the original color is still showing, but if you put down just enough of this lighter blue, it will give the impression that the armband is actually the lighter color of blue, but it's the light that's giving it that brighter color. And then just like with the skin, we have one very, very small highlight of blue to do on top of that second layer. And here we're only going to put it on like the knot for the sash, the parts of the sash that are sticking up the most, maybe the absolute raised portions of the muscle, but we just want to put it a little. So the same kind of place where you did the Kislev flesh on the muscle, do that same kind of highlighting with this last layer of blue, and it will really give a nice three-dimensional pop to the model. So there we have it. And I think just like the skin, that came out fantastic. So with the cloth, the skin, the sash, we've only got a couple things left. Of course, we're going to save the hair for last, because you got to do that. Now, as far as the boots, I looked up a number of different pictures of Goku. Some of them have the red on the stripes, where you're seeing me paint here, and the laces of the boots were kind of a beige yellow. And other pictures had it flipped, where the stripes were a white or a lighter cream color, and then the laces were red. So I kind of went back and forth. Ultimately, I said, I think I like the red stripes with the white laces or the yellow laces better. So that's what I went with here. If I got it wrong and have offended you large fans of Dragon Ball Z, I apologize. Tell the folks who post stuff on Google Images to be more consistent. Now, when it comes to painting the laces, I didn't want to do yellow. That would have been too bright, and that would have drawn attention away from the rest of the model. So instead, I started with a darker tan, the Steel Legion Drab. You could use any kind of khaki, but something darker than that. And then, once that's dry over top, I'm going to put a slightly yellowish tan over top of it. So it still is definitely a yellow color, but you don't want something super bright that's going to make whoever looks at the model, the first thing they see is looking down at his shoes. So here I'm using the Zamisi Desert. For me, I thought it was yellow enough to be yellow, but brown enough to still blend into everything nicely. Okay, boots are done. All we got left is the hair. And if I was painting him with the dark black hair, I could just touch up where the skin color spilled over, but I'm not going to do that. I want my Goku Super Saiyan. So we're going to paint blonde. And I have a go-to pattern for blonde that I use pretty much every time. I use it on my dwarfs, I use it on Battle Brothers, Space Marines, everything. When I need blonde, I start with Xandri Dust. It's a really, really good base coat for painting blonde. And the nice thing is that with hair like his, it will be as easy to highlight as his skin and as his clothing. The raised areas and the recessed areas of the models are really, really defined. So it's nice and easy to pick out where you want to put the brighter colors. So after probably about 2 coats of Xandri Dust or whatever khaki color you want for the hair, you'll be ready for the highlighting. One thing I tend to forget, and I'm glad I didn't forget with this guy, don't forget to paint eyebrows. Even if they're not specifically modeled on the model, take whatever hair color you're doing and just do a quick line above the eye or at the brow level. Because otherwise, it's one of those subtle things that you won't know why, but the model will just look a little bit off. And once you give him eyebrows, suddenly it looks good. I noticed that when I was painting my dwarves. A bunch of them didn't look that great, and I thought, what's missing? And then I realized, oh, I didn't paint eyebrows on them. So now it's time for the highlights. Use any kind of bone color, any kind of light beige, just as long as it's got a pretty stark contrast with the coat underneath. And here, just hit raised edges. You want to make sure you can see both the darker khaki and the lighter bone color clearly defined. And then when you're doing the back of the hair, that gets a little bit more interesting because it's like spikes. So with that part, just paint the tops. Pretend that his hair are mountain ranges. Just put snow on the top of the mountains. So this last highlight's pretty optional. I think the hair looks pretty good, but I wanted a slightly more, a really bright highlight on maybe the tips of the hair or something like that. And I don't know, maybe it's just OCD or habit that everything else has 3 layers: the skin, the sash, the pants, so why not the hair too? So get one other slightly lighter color of your beige and paint over the highlights you did previously, leaving a little bit of the previous layer showing to get a nice transition. And there he is, all finished. He's ready for the ring. I think he looks pretty darn good. I'm telling you folks, that 3-layer strategy will keep you from adding layer after layer after layer unnecessarily, but it'll still give you the depth, the detail, and the contrast to make your models look really good. And then here's Billy after I finished him. Exact same techniques, 3 layers on his hair, on his cloth, everything, the boots. It's simply darker, medium, and light tone. So now these guys are ready for the ring, and while they won't win me any competitions, I would definitely say that they are good enough.